All right, we are going live. All right. And, all right. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Talk on Race, Lower Cape with the YWCA Lower Cape Fear. I am Jhaniqua Farrar, and today we have a very great panel for you, and we are looking forward to an amazing discussion on public safety. But first, our land acknowledgement. The YWCA Lower Cape Fear serves the people located within the Lower Cape Fear region. This land once thrived with life from indigenous peoples known today as the Cape Fear Indians and the Waccamaw Siouan Indian people, living in established settlements along the Cape Fear River and Lake Waccamaw, along with many other established sites in the region. We need to protect and honor the history of these places. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They are still here, continuing to demonstrate their talents and gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. They are worth celebrating. We hope that our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations. Thank you so much. All right, let's get this conversation going. Let's start with introductions. We'll start with Dr. Jones.
Well, good afternoon and good morning for me because it's 11 o'clock where I'm at. I'm Dr. Joseph L. Jones. I'm an associate professor of political science at Philander Smith College, a little small HBCU in Little Rock, Arkansas. A lot of my work has been around diversity and implicit bias training, as well as protesting the police. So I've seen both sides of the coin, and so I look very forward to this conversation.
Okay, and we'll go to Ms. Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jhaniqua. My name is Vanessa Gonzalez. I'm a local attorney here in Wilmington, focusing my practice on immigration law. I also dabble into a little bit of district court when it comes to protest defense work and other things, as well as a community volunteer and a proud board member of the YWCA.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. Sheriff McMahon.
Well, good afternoon. I am Sheriff Ed McMahon, and I'm the Sheriff of New Hanover County. I've been Sheriff since 2009 here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, Lettie.
Hey, my name is Lettie Shumate. I'm a historian in Wilmington, North Carolina and surrounding areas, and an anti-racism educator, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank y'all all for coming. I just really think that public safety, this conversation is very important because everyone, that is living in our communities, we all want to be safe. We all want to be able to go to the grocery store and feel safe. We all want to be able to walk down the street and feel safe. And we know based on statistics that, everybody does not have that kind of safe feeling in their community. And so let's talk about what does racial disparities and public safety look like. One statistic that I will bring up first is that in New Hanover County, African Americans represent only 18.6% of our population, but it represents 49.8% of arrest charges. So, how do we get there? How do we get there? And anybody feel free to jump in. You don't have to put yourself on mute. I really want this to be kind of a rich conversation.
Well,
I mean, I can jump in and start, and I think that I will then punt it to Lettie to get into the historical pretext to some of the stuff that I want to bring up. But obviously, the way that policing developed in the United States in general, not Wilmington as a whole, served as a means to police certain communities to further white supremacy. And even though we've grown historically from that time, a lot of those practices still serve, which lead to what we see today as over-policing, sentence disparity, overcharging, things of that nature.
Yeah, so, right. So police originated in the South in early 1700s as slave patrollers. And something that I've actually gotten pushback about as a historian is people want to say, well, actually, not all police are like that, because you had police up north where there was not enslavement. And my thing with that, though, is, right, but there was a collective idea of what was deemed as crime. And so whenever you take these racist stereotypes, right, and then you start having crime being associated with Black people, and especially freed Black people after slavery ended, the issue comes with this, like, this semantic kind of thing of, well, actually, the police were just protecting America. I'm like, okay, but America was always white America because we were actually property. And so that's where you have police coming from. And so when we talk about like 2020 America, right? And this idea that not all cops are XYZ. And the fact of the matter, though, is the entire institution was founded on racism and to uphold white supremacy, and also not just to protect white people, but to also protect capitalism and to also protect the power of whiteness. So a lot of that goes into it, and I just said a lot in one little bit, but it's really important to talk about that, because also what comes into that, right, are discussions about economic disparities and how there was justification for putting Black people as the ones who are criminals, how physically that manifested. And why that manifested, and also how we see that play out in Wilmington and what happened after really 1896. So, yeah, and the 1898 race massacre, of course, but I always start with 1896 because you have to start with the state as a whole and what was happening politically, and what that meant for America, because North Carolina was on the map for what we were doing here. So.
If I can just also compliment Vanessa and Lettie and really talk about the historical context of it, and really talk about it from a democracy frame, right? You know, one of the things that I don't think, you know, is really talked about or really taking a deep dive into understanding how deep this issue of policing goes. It goes all the way back to the founding of our country, right? Crispus Attucks, if you understand and know this man's name, was the first Black man who was killed in the Revolutionary War, right? Through the Boston Massacre. John Adams took up in defense of the British against Crispus Attucks, right? And basically had made the claim that Crispus Attucks was this mean, burly, you know, savage kind of Negro that was attacking the British, the same people that America went to war for, right? And we know that John Adams ended up becoming the second president of the United States. So here we have, at the beginning of the country, specifically Black people being framed as being problematic, as being criminal, as being inhuman, to get off the same people they were fighting against for freedom. And so that, I think, kind of complements what Lettie is talking about, how deep and structural this problem of policing is in this country, where almost the very first justice case in this country started with an attack on a man who was fighting for the freedom of the colonists. And so when we begin this conversation there, then we can begin to start to understand how this has framed the justice system and policing throughout, you know, basically the last decades or centuries of this country. And so that's a very important point. And I just want to echo the sentiments of Lettie that yes, from the beginning of this country, it has been this kind of conversation against Black people being monstrous and inhuman, and or as John Adams says, you know, just being savage, and that's why the British had to kill him. So,
Wow, when you said Crispus Attucks, I promise, like in my head, I went back to like high school history class. And when you're sitting in school, especially in grade school, you're not really putting these pieces together to see like this is the fruit of what we see now in our communities, where we have people trying to come together, or we have people, we have a lot of these just people trying to understand what's happening. It's hard to understand what's happening without giving it a historical context, without giving it a framework, which we are living in and are moving in and are being in with, and not even understanding where it started. So thank everyone for that, because I hadn't thought about it like that. So my next question is, as we are moving towards this, there is a large movement, especially after the murder of George Floyd, to push towards these ideas of defunding the police. And the campaigns that I've seen and that I've read upon have been saying, it's not saying we don't want police here, we don't want police presence, but we have to change the way police operate, change the structure, and move some of this funding from the police departments and move it to other places such as education, money for nonprofits, money for services, to kind of help, money for jobs, to kind of help people who may end up in the criminal justice system, like not even get a chance to enter there. So what are your thoughts on defunding the police? And, thank you so much, Sheriff McMahon, for coming, because we did ask the new police department director to come, but he declined. And I think that before we get into this, I think it's very important to know to have these conversations, because I don't know if I'm for defunding the police, because I have been in situations where, I came home and my door was open. The first thing I did was call 911, right? But then I also have the experience where when my husband leaves out at night at 10 o'clock and he doesn't come back within 30 minutes, my adrenaline is pumping. I start feeling a little anxiety because I don't know what is going to happen to him. And I also have the experience of seeing, worrying about my brothers, wearing their pants baggy and not being in this whole respectability politics notion of like, this is what you do to keep you safe. So, I thank everyone for coming to the table. We're not here to bash anything, but really to have a conversation about what does this look like? What does this mean? Because I think at the end of the day, most of us are trying to keep us safe. Most of us want our families to live, but how can we do this on both sides of the table?
Well, thank you for having me. And I kind of plan just to do a lot of listening today.
Okay.
Yeah, so just a personal thing about me, I share this because I actually didn't even realize the magnitude of it until 3 or 4 years ago. Whenever I was growing up, grew up next to my grandparents, my mom's parents, and then it was my parents' house, and then beside us was my aunt and my uncle, one of my many aunts and uncles. But whenever anything would happen growing up, something my parents always told me was never, if something happens at home, call the police. That she never told me that. It was always, if something happens and we're not at home, go over to grandma's house. If something happens, we're not home, go over to your aunt's house. And I just always thought it was because, oh, it's grandma, it's my aunt. But as a 32-year-old woman, Black woman in this country, and after talking to my parents who've experienced a lot in their lifetimes, I see actually what they were saying without saying it. And that's something, right, that I just didn't realize. And now, even now, my first thought for something, sometimes, sure, it's like a habit to be like, oh, well, call the police. But actually, for a lot of things, it's not. It is not, because I've seen what happens whenever you call the police. I've literally seen it with my own eyes. I've seen it happen to my family. I've heard it happen to friends. I've seen what's happening in our country right now. So for me, whenever it comes to, and I like to say defund the police, I don't like to use the phrase of reforming, because just the definition of the word reform, my thing is, how do you reform an entire institution that's actually built into an entire system of racism and white supremacy, which is our country? So it's like boxes within boxes. And so for me, defunding the police is absolutely necessary, because there's absolutely no reason why police should be getting millions and millions of dollars for budgets, and you have teachers who can't even buy school supplies. And so that's just one example, right? Because that goes into another racial disparity, which is education in our country. And so everything is literally connected for me. And honestly, I feel like there's a lot of pushback whenever it comes to the conversation about defunding the police, because the word defund, people automatically think it means take everything away. But what it really means is, let's have a conversation about what it looks like to imagine public safety, like that's legitimately safety for all people, because police are not safe for all of us. They're not safe for people who look like me, and who look like two of us who are on this call right now. Like, that's just not the reality. And I say that, and it sounds very frank and very matter of fact, but at the same time, it's like, why sugarcoat stuff? We have phones, we see what happens. But I'm gonna get off of that for a second. Let's wait on stuff.
Well, someone on Facebook has commented, they said reallocation of funds. Mm-hmm. So I think people are understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because I mean, earlier this year, I looked at the budget for Wilmington, and I was like, what? Why? Like, honestly, why? Like, what is the reason for that, right? Because when you look at the numbers and you look at the statistics, who are the people who become victims of this? And then there's, of course, the bigger conversation about police and training, but
and we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Okay, Dr. Jones or Vanessa, would you like to comment on defunding the police, the campaigns?
Well, I think it's clear we have to be clear about what is meant by defund the police, right? It doesn't mean disband the police. It's a reallocation of funds into different things, because I think many of us who are in this struggle, who understand the complexities of what happens in our communities, understand that that a lot of these things are structural, and you have to take an intersectional view to the conditions of people to really understand why things are happening the way they are. So you have to use an economic lens, right? You got to use a social lens. You got to use a political lens. You have to use all these things to understand people's behavior. And then more importantly, I mean, if you go back and you understand the history of policing, police officers are supposed to be peace officers, right? And so their job is to basically to maintain the peace and order, and not to be able to take a deep dive in the past 20, 30 years, but I mean, this kind of hyper-militarization of police is in response, primarily within the last 20 years, is because of what we experienced in 9/11, right? With terrorism, right? And kind of going all the way back into the 80s when we started, seeing mass incarceration, right? All these things are interconnected when certain people or certain communities are defined as problems, right? And for those of us who know Du Bois, he talked about this about 100 years ago, what it means and how it feels to be a problem, right? It not a citizen, but a problem. And that's something I really want to stress today. When we start having these conversations, what's undergirded in this is basically the concept of citizenship, right? All these issues that we're talking about, defunding police and all these things, basically comes down to certain people are not viewed as citizens and are not treated as citizens in this country. So when we start talking about, defunding the police, reimagining the police, whatever we're talking about, part of that conversation has to be police officers seeing people of color as citizens and treating them as citizens, which comes with all the constitutional rights. This is one of the reasons why I think so many people, George Floyd's death resonated with so many people, black, white, brown, it doesn't matter, because he was pretty much killed right in front of our eyes. There was no due process for this man, none. I mean, none at all. I mean, he literally died on the street. And so whether you're black, white, brown, or whatever, that can resonate because he was not treated like a citizen, right? And we saw it, let's be clear. As Lettie says, we have the cameras, we can see that. I mean, it's kind of, we can think about a Tamir Rice but we don't really, we can't really, see things in a very clear way, or Ahmaud Arbery, we know some things, but I mean, but with George Floyd, it was clear as day. And so I think when we start talking about these conversations around policing, we have to center, this notion of citizenship, and not only just for policing engaging these communities, but even for us, for Black folks and Latinos and Latinx folks and everything. Because sometimes, our own interaction with the state is police. And so we tend not to want to claim citizenship, right? So the state is our enemy. We don't want to be a part of this system. We don't want to vote. We don't want to do all these things because of all the things that historically and contemporarily happens to our community. But we're going to have to own up on that. And we're going to have to act within our citizenship and demand certain things. So I think this conversation around, defunding the police is very, very important, because it's a resource question, right? And I don't want to continue to go on. I can go on and on, but for me, it's not disbanding. It's not disbanding. Let's be clear, because I think people hear this defund, they think, okay, it's going to go away. It's reallocating resources into some of these other social programs, which kind of create the conditions in which some people might seek crime or do things to harm other people. And so that is the conversation. So I'll let Vanessa jump in.
I'd like to piggyback off of that, Joseph. Those were great points about citizenship and also hyper-militarization in the wake of terrorism in the United States. And as an immigration attorney, we see that especially with peaked immigration enforcement. So I am definitely a proponent of defunding the police, also ending cash bail and abolishing ICE intersectionally as all of that plays. And I'd also like to bring it a little bit close to home and just talk about resources, because sometimes these conversations become a little bit easier to stomach and less personal, although it might feel a little bit personal, Sheriff McMahon, while I talk about some of these things, because local agencies are involved. But when we talk about terms of resources, and as Joseph talked about folks' rights as citizens, for example, after what happened with George Floyd, and here in Wilmington, we had quite a bit of protesting that is individuals' constitutionally protected right to free speech. And we were faced with and saw here downtown an over-militarization response of police. And then we saw a scattered amount of arrests for things like failure to disperse. And under North Carolina general statutes, in order to give a command to disperse, there has to be some sort of a riot or threat of imminent violence that honestly didn't exist downtown in our protests, I would argue, at all. And some would argue until the police had dispersed tear gas and started doing different tactics, right? Then those folks got placed into the system. Most of those folks were fortunate enough that they didn't get put into a situation that many people do, that they're in pretrial detention that affects their decisions around their cases, that might make them take a plea they wouldn't normally take because they can't afford bail. That didn't happen in a lot of our local protesting cases. Fortunately, a lot of folks were able to be released the same day. Nonetheless, they're then placed into a court system that says you're either going to take this plea guilty, or you're going to have to take it all the way to trial. Meanwhile, our local court system is dismissing left and right similarly suited misdemeanors in traffic court for some of my no operators license clients and things like that to clear up the docket because of coronavirus. And so in my opinion, these protesting charges that didn't result in any actual property damage, any actual physical harm to anyone, any of the actual elements that would allude to a riot or real disorderly conduct, they're just as simple and useless to the local district court system as the no operators license cases or other cases that have been generally dismissed to clear up the docket. And so I think that is a larger conversation about a matter of resources. So when folks talk about defunding the police, they're talking about that. They're talking about, why are we spending resources on a specifically targeted population in a specific way, and why that's unfair when we talk about folks' constitutionally protected rights and civil liberties.
Wow.
If I could just say something real quick on that. I'm the whole defund the police is of course I disagree with it. And to bring it home local, 82% of my budget is salaries. So if you talk about a cut or defund, that's, in my opinion, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking positions, you're going to be taking deputies away. And I heard it said one time, it's hard to hate up close. And that's why I've been trying to really listen to these conversations and try to put myself in your shoes and understand, because it is hard to hate up close. But if you take away deputies from me, we're already going call to call to call to call. And you got to figure most of the calls are bad. So we don't have time to build relationships, positive relationships with our community a lot of times. So that's one thing. And then again, I'm going to disagree with protesting is absolutely our right to do. We probably had 6 weeks of protesting, and we had one night where we had to disperse the crowd because there were people that were arrested that had guns. And I was out there that night. I had rocks flying by my head. I had a full water bottle hit my foot and explode. We asked everyone to leave and they wouldn't leave. And what people don't have a right to do is to damage and destroy property. So the night that we responded with that force was because people were in Wilmington to destroy Wilmington. All the rest of the nights, the other, 2 months, people protested. We were there, we protected them, we watched over them. So let's give the whole story. When we do wrong, absolutely, and there's always room for improvement, but let's not say things if it's not true. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, any response?
Well, I'd just like to counter with, I hope that we continue with that similar energy, because a lot of folks that were arrested on the night in question were then placed within the system and placed into agreements for probation, and will continue to demonstrate, I hope. And what we've seen outside of that night when things did get escalated are continued citations, continued targeted enforcement around the protests. And now that folks who have been demonstrating are within the system and under the purview of probation, it would be fairly easy for folks to get re-violated. And these are the concerns we have when we talk about things being a cycle and systemic. And I hope you can understand my concerns about why things like that would be a way of de facto quashing someone's free speech.
And there's a comment on Facebook that says social workers, public health workers, etc., will hopefully be able to step in instead of deputies if funds are reallocated. Therefore, not as many deputies will be needed. So it seems that she's pointing to the fact that maybe other public agencies and public workers could step in and serve as mediators in situations where deputies are not needed. And then there's also a comment that says that let's talk about targeted reinforcement because it can be seen as intimidation. So those are the comments that are happening. So people are listening to what we're saying. People are listening to what we're saying, and and people are still posting. So I will keep everyone updated. One of the things that I discovered as I was thinking about the notion of public safety was that Governor Roy Cooper just established a North Carolina task force for racial equity in the criminal justice system. Some of the things that they have that they're working towards are policies where law enforcement officers, they would report other officers who use excessive force. And maybe this is a comment that maybe some police officers, as they are witnessing their other coworkers use excessive force, they don't feel that they have the the safety or the notion to kind of confront that officer. They don't have the safety or notion or feel like that they can report it to their supervisors. So, I would hope that as this conversation is taking place and as this task force is moving forward, that the sheriff department and New Hanover County Police Department will create a space that is safe for other officers to report the other seeing other officers use excessive force. And I think that's it feels kind of sad that they don't feel comfortable, even as police officers, to actually say, I've seen my fellow coworker use excessive force.
I agree with you on that, but we have that in place. We
Oh,
do have
good.
in our special operating procedures, there is a duty to report. We have an internal affairs unit, and if they don't report, they will be disciplined. So absolutely, that is needed, and we currently have that.
Well, that's good to know.
Is it duty to report or duty to intervene?
Oh, well, it's both. They have
Okay,
to report it and they have to intervene. That's a great point. Thank you. But they have to intervene. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's really good to hear. The second point for the task force is to enact a use force policy which prohibits neck holds, choke holds, lateral vascular neck restraints, or any other kind of tactics that will restrict oxygen or blood flow. So, is that something that y'all are also working towards?
Yes,
Or
we have that. That's already been a policy. That would be considered deadly force. So what we've told the deputies is, you don't use those types of things unless it's absolutely, a deadly force type scenario. So I 100% agree with that.
Yes, thank you so much, Sheriff. And then they are requiring for assessments of defendants to be made to see about their ability to pay levying and any fines or fees. And so, Vanessa, is this something that you see, that some of your clients have excessive fees that they actually will not be able to pay, or like feel like they're always paying?
Sure. So I don't do a ton of criminal defense outside of the realm that we're talking about here today, but there are similar things within the immigration system as well when it comes to bond and stuff like that. And there's another aspect to this that, yes, that's a common theme, and that our justice system, as well as the immigration system, honestly criminalizes poverty. And when we talk about socioeconomic disparities, they sometimes similarly fall in line along racial disparities, right? And so sometimes that has a huge play into it as well. And you'll see folks that would say, you know what, the system, they don't believe in having to, that they're going to have the ability to continue to pay to stay on their probation. It's hard to get a job once you've been placed into an offender category. And so even if you're offered options that wouldn't particularly be detention, there are some defendants that would prefer just going to jail and getting it over with, because being on the hook is not something that's really logistically possible for them given their circumstances. And then we see that folks get reviolated for economic reasons. And that's another thing that the defunding argument could go towards.
And I think the most egregious example of what Vanessa is talking about is what came out of Ferguson, right? When the Justice Department did their analysis, when they went in there and they looked at, how the fines and the fee structures were pretty much, off the backs of the community, whether it was tickets, whether it was just fines, and how it made I don't know what the percentage, but a significant amount of the budget came from fines and fees. And so when we talk about poverty as being a lens and trying to understand, criminal justice types of things, we have to use that lens to understand that, yes, poor people can't afford a $200 ticket, right? And so what happens if they don't pay their ticket, and then they have a warrant, then they get arrested, and then they have, it's an endless cycle of just debt that the state is placing on them because of their economic position, right? And it's an egregious thing that we have to live in a country where the state itself is basically bankrolling, its employees, its system off the backs of poor people. And And this is where I think the federal government can kind of come in, and Obama's Justice Department did do this. They went in, they did the investigation, they did the analysis, and they said, this is what's happening. And we need more of that, because if it's happening in Ferguson, then it definitely is happening in dozens, if not, hundreds of other cities across the United States. But where do you get that magnifying glass to kind of look in and to be able to do that kind of analysis? And so I just wanted to piggyback on Vanessa's point. Yeah, that's such an important point.
And even down to the most simplistic level, if you look at just mere accessibility to the criminal justice system, our courthouse and any courthouse that I go to for traffic court in North Carolina is surrounded by metered parking only that's completely filled up. If you park in the wrong parking lot, you're getting towed, and that's another $200 to get your car back, besides what you lost from not going to work that day.
Right.
If you can even risk to get the day off, plus the lawyer, plus the court fees. You pay extra if you need a couple extra days. And so the costs in general for something that might be a small violation can compound exponentially for folks that are already in a bind.
And actually, to bring in another history part, Joseph, something you were just talking about, also Vanessa, you had touched on this, was cash bail, but what that originates from, and it originates from convict leasing and enslaved labor camps, which also existed within the convict leasing system. So you had convict leasing, then you also had the illegal trading of Black people, Black men and women, into enslaved labor camps. This is during the Reconstruction era and also after, because the only reason why the Reconstruction era failed is because Black people, Black men got the right to vote. Okay.
Right.
And so let's just make that clear. And it didn't fail. They purposely terminated it. All right. And so when we talk about cash bail, right, today, and we talk about debt and what that represented for Black people, like Black people were literally kept in prison for usually because things they didn't do. Let's just make that clear. Also, crimes they did not commit. And they had to work off the debt. And if they didn't, they never got out. And their families didn't even know where they were. Now I'm going to get into the fact that Black people were just taken off the street and just accused of things in different towns, in different cities, in different parishes, if we're talking about other regions of our country. And so that entire system is directly linked to mass incarceration in our country today, right? And when we talk about mass incarceration, and we talk about what that does to the Black family, what that does for Black poverty. And I do say Black poverty, not just poverty, whenever I talk about this, because it's a specific type of poverty that's directly linked to anti-Black racism. So there's just a lot that goes into that, but I just wanted to mention that because Joseph, you brought up a really good point, and people forget that that also is rooted in history, right? So yeah, I just want to add that in there.
Woo, that was a lot to take in, but I mean, I think I see it. You see it in concentrated poverty. You see it, and I will talk about my experience. My son goes to DC Virgo, and this is when we were in school, and driving downtown on Rankin Street and on Market Street, I would see at least 5 to 10 police officers, at least. This is every day. And as I would head back home or move back towards where we live, which is closer to the Mayfair area, I see police officers like every so often. I don't see them as much. And so when I think about anti-racism poverty, Lettie, that you just talked about, I also think about what it's like to live in that area, what that experience is, what are the images that you see, what growing up, and even thinking about like your ACEs score, the average childhood experiences. When you live in concentrated poverty, your ACEs score tends to be higher. You grow up knowing people who are in and out of jail. You grow up knowing domestic violence, and some of these things are the experiences that you have when you live in that type of area. So what do we do is my question. What trainings can we implement? You know, right now since George Floyd, the coin is like, you know, now everybody's doing all of this bias training, you know, and now we have a new term that I'm hearing a lot more, which is anti-racism work. What can our community do? What do the sheriff's office and the police departments and the social workers and community organizations, how do we come together to improve the life of Black and Brown people? It's real, and I know this is a hard question. I know, like, we can't snap our fingers and make it perfect, you know. But especially for the people who are listening, what do we do? You know, I know, like, the YWCA, we have the 21-day challenge, and that has helped some people a lot with getting resources and being able to read books, you know, to kind of give them a better understanding and a better context of what they are hearing. But, you know, what is your suggestions? Especially you, Lettie, because someone just put hashtag Lettie 2020. So I don't know if you're running for office or something, but you know, people are listening, and they want hope, and they want to know what can be done.
Yeah, I mean, also shout out to whoever said that. You want to run my campaign, because the way 2020 is set up, it's out here throwing curveballs. But anyway, I will say that the first thing, like, I definitely saw after George Floyd's murder, I saw a rise in, especially white people in our country, wanting to learn more about what it means to be anti-racist, right? But there's a lot of other stuff going on at that time too, where we're at home and no one can really go anywhere. So your emotions are already high. So you're already at this peak of, oh my gosh, I'm watching this happen. Oh my goodness, what can I do? And I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I'm sitting here like, right, I thought that 5 years ago. I thought that like 8 years ago. Like, this is not new for me. But in that moment, I was like, all right, I'm glad that people are wanting to have the conversation, because you could be doing anything else, right? And so the first thing to know is, yes, we can read, and you need to read. You like listen to Black people, listen to brown people who are educating about this topic, because how are you going to learn from someone who doesn't experience this, right? Who doesn't experience racism and white supremacy directly. And so that's the first thing. Second thing, definitely know that you can't read and train your way out of racism. You have to take action out here. Like, you have to take action. That action can, and I don't mean like everyone can go out and just protest. It's not what I mean. Action can be taken in other forms. Action is also calling out your racist grandma. Just saying, right? Action is also standing up for people who are marginalized. Whenever you see something happening that is wrong, you're supposed to stand up and say something about that. Don't sit here and say hashtag ally, anything like that. And that's on social media. That ain't saving no Black people. That's not saving any brown people out here. I'm just being real right now, because this is not a trend. This is not a trend. Like, we are going back to what Joseph mentioned before. We are citizens of this country. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it goes back to that, what Joseph said earlier about citizenship and being seen that way. So yeah, I am glad, I will say this, I am very glad that there have been more anti-racism trainings. People have been wanting to know more, do more. I've seen more people out here, especially in Wilmington, volunteering, speaking up, trying to get involved. I'm part of the board of Dreams. And so we've been doing more, even about having a racial justice committee, like, you know, things like that, that explicitly state what we stand for. And that kind of stuff also is extremely important. And know that organizing that I saw happening in Wilmington this summer, that I've also seen happening in Wilmington before this summer, that is what history shows us matters. Y'all, there's never been any movement that has happened that hasn't taken more than a decade. And that's what I also want people to understand is, you can look at the civil rights movement all day. You can look at all this stuff all day long, but I want you to know that it started before 1955. It started before Rosa Parks sat down. It didn't end after I Have a Dream. It didn't end after the Black Panther Party. It didn't end after any of that, right? We're still in it. It just evolved into Rodney King. It just evolved into Trayvon Martin and George Floyd today. So I want people to really connect those dots and to really see that it's going to take a collective effort, and it's not going to happen overnight because you post something on social media 1 or 2 times. And so that's why I am also glad for different organizations that are actually doing something about racism in our country, but know that laws and policies don't change. The people change. People make changes happen. So it's always made change happen in our country, and financial hits too. That kind of stuff matters as well.
I have one question real quick, Joseph. For the sheriff, are deputies required to live in the counties that they serve? Because this, excuse me, because this could be a way to help build relationships.
They are not. They have to live within a certain mileage of it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the counties surrounding us are a lot less, or a lot more financially. They
They're
don't make that
affordable.
much money, so they're affordable. That's what I was looking
I'll
for.
say it for you. They're affordable.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Joseph Jones.
No, I was just going to respond to your former question. What can we do? It's got to be a 2-track solution, right? So there has to be some internal things that have to happen in police departments, right? And I spoke about, I got a lens into doing some implicit bias training with the Little Rock Police Department about 4 or 5 years ago. And if you guys remember in McKinney, Texas, when that police officer ran down that young lady and put her knee. So we showed that video, like as a part of the training, and prompted the officers, like, what did they do right? What did they do wrong? Just to try to, get a sense as a framing of having conversations. And I can tell you, like I said, we literally did the entire Little Rock Police Department. So like I said, it was over 6 months. So we met every officer, new and old, and all the way up to the sergeants and so on and so forth. And the vast majority of them were like, this guy was embarrassed because he fell, he's stupid, he should have done this. But you could tell those 1 or 2 who were not going to relent in saying that this guy was justified in putting this, his knee in this girl's back. And so when we have these kind of generalized conversations around police, for me, I kind of walked away of saying, okay, most of these police officers have, really good sense, like they would not do these kind of things, but I could tell that 10% that was there. And so internally, there has to be some things that police officers do among themselves. So there's not like a blue against everybody else. It's right. And this is wrong. There has to be a sense of integrity, but that has to come from the leadership, and it has to trickle down. Only reason why I was even there was because the police chief, invited me to come. And after we did that training, and when he left, they didn't invite us anymore because they didn't see that value in it. So it all starts and it falls with leadership. Externally, yes, we have to push for policies to change. Qualified immunity is something that we're going to have to really, really look at, in this country. Because if a police officer has the right to pretty much take a life, that should be held at the highest standard. And if they mess up, then they need to, but just my own opinion, then they need to deal with the consequences. But that is one of the biggest hurdles why a lot of, police officers are not charged or not, indicted. It's because of that particular law. And so if you're representing the state, if you're representing the people, then you ought to have the highest standard for your job to ensure that you are a peace officer and not somebody who's wreaking havoc or terrorism into the communities in which you serve. And so, but that can come from us. That comes from protesting. That comes from us asking that these things, be changed. And so it has to happen simultaneously. It has to happen externally and internally. The policies, the practices, and the programs have to change, and we have to be the ones to keep pushing those conversations.
Vanessa, any thoughts about where we could go, what we can do, what kind of trainings?
That's super hard to follow what Joseph said. I'm in complete agreement. I think that there's a lot of things to do internally. as much as we quit back and forth, I will give a shout out to Sheriff McMahon for having been to Latino Alliance meetings within the community and be willing to train his deputies on victims' immigration issues and things like that. That deputies can be better served on how, when they come up on a domestic violence situation, that's not the end of it for undocumented victims, and what happens to these cases after we ask you for a certification. Things like that. Education, getting folks like Mr. Joseph into your law enforcement agencies, and more than just a one-off visit, actually, listening and pay attention to which of your deputies are not listening. So I'm completely with him on these are things that need to be addressed internally. And when the community is telling you that it's a problem and it's not been addressed internally, then the community needs to take care of it externally. And unfortunately for you, Mr. McMahon, you're an elected position, as are a lot of our folks, from the district attorney to folks that make decisions within the community on city and county councils and things like that. And when the community speaks and it doesn't feel like anybody listens, then you get these Lettie 2020s, and it's folks that don't have political aspirations become politicians out of necessity. And so, kind of, if you're already in that position, then work on the internal fixes and don't shy away from conversations, as well as education from folks who do this, to help internally as well. And then I think it also goes down to HR practices and company culture and things of that nature. A good point that Joseph brought up about qualified immunity. I'm an attorney. If doing this talk on race today, I missed a court date that I forgot about because I'm here Zooming with you all, I could get suspended and possibly disbarred because I messed up a case. And that looms over my head every day, all day. I can't even get a facial without freaking out and thinking, is there something I missed on my schedule? Because it's that serious. And there are attorneys that I know that are good folks who have been suspended and disbarred for the littlest of things. And that type of energy, if that's brought to us as, officers of the court, that type of energy needs to be brought to actual officers. Because while I might really mess up somebody's case, I might end up causing someone a lot of money. I could cause someone to be deported if I'm not paying enough attention. I'm not in a position that I'm going to kill anyone.
Yeah. And I think, Vanessa, I can speak for myself that as I have seen the headline cases happen, and I've seen people like George Zimmerman go free. I've seen, officers not get indicted. It has been heartbreaking when I know that, like you said, even as a lawyer, as doctors, if doctors do, if they cut the wrong vein, if they operate on the wrong person, for example, if they have a case of mistaken identity, they are not going to operate anymore. But when police officers, it seems, have cases of mistaken identity, it doesn't seem to have the same life or death effect for them. And I think that, what I would love, or what my hope would be, is that in the future, everyone is held accountable, and that accountability looks equitable across the board. From convictions to apologies, to possibly even reparations, there is a level of accountability. And so as we are nearing the close of this great dialogue, thank y'all all so much. I would just ask for everyone to share their final thoughts. And I would love to end on a positive note and maybe an accountable note. So if you would like to do a charge to the community, or if you would like to, end on a message of inspiration on what we can do, people who are here working on the ground levels, I will leave that up to you. I will start with Vanessa.
Okay. I think something as a charge or takeaway from this is to know your place in your lane, and we still exist in the systems that we have to exist in. And so a very pertinent point that Lettie brought up was that in her upbringing, it didn't even occur to her to call the police in certain circumstances because of the existence of how police brutality exists today. As a white woman, I think on the other end of that, how white people, white women have weaponized the police in calling the police in circumstances that is unwarranted. So, I mean, these conversations go across race and think about who you are, what your privileges are, what your talents are, and how you can potentially contribute to the problem that we have societally, and how you can move differently in contributing to the change.
Thank you so much. Okay, Miss Lettie.
Yeah, so I would definitely just end by saying read history, and don't just read history that makes you comfortable. A lot of history makes you uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me. I don't read easy history. I read things about racism and economic labor and things like that. But also what I see in history, right, is there's a lot of dark, but there's also a lot of bright, and because there's an underlying story there of resilience and persistence. Because that is also the history of America, specifically people of color and Black people. So that's what keeps me going, is I'm like, I got my ancestors' blood running through my veins. I'm not about to sit here and stop for nobody. So keep that energy. And also though, too, remember to get out into the community and get involved. Like actually get involved, listen to Black people, listen to brown people. And I will say to Sheriff McMahon, I'm glad that you were actually here today to listen. And I'm glad that you said in the beginning that you were here to listen and not to try to talk over. And so that actually is really appreciated. I just wanted to say that.
All right, well, Sheriff McMahon.
Well, thank you, all of you, for including me. Thank you for your candor. And I agree that we at the top have to hold our law enforcement officers accountable. And I'll also agree, I grew up in a small town in New England, and all this racism, I was it never even occurred to me about all of the injustices that have happened. And so, you know, as the sheriff for the last 11 years and watching things, horrible things that you just can't, they're not excusable. I'm committed to hold the deputies responsible. I know you all know Linda Thompson, and she's the county's new Chief Diversity and Equity Officer. I've already met with her. She has designed a block of training about biased policing for us. She's going to teach every deputy, every detention officer. So my commitment to everyone here on this panel, a lot of you I know and see in meetings, hold me accountable to have fair, unbiased policing. And if we do something wrong, I will hold us accountable for it because I know that it takes all of us together, working together, trusting each other to keep our community safe. So I'm here and I'm listening. You hurt my feelings, but that's okay. It's much bigger than my feelings. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Dr. Jones.
You know, I promised myself and my students when I came into this conversation that, and we didn't do this, but one of the things I've been trying to get into a practice of not doing is having, you know, gender conversations about topics, right? And it would be remiss if we didn't talk about, or I didn't mention, you know, Breonna Taylor as a part of these kind of things that are going on, and just Black women, and just women in general in law enforcement. And I'm teaching a class called Women in Politics this semester, and we just met this week. And this week's theme was on, you know, Black women in justice. And we talked about how specifically Black women are invisible to a lot of these things, and how police officers sometimes, whether it's in the schools or whether it's in the community, there are a lot of things that Black women or women in general deal with, because we're talking about people with power, right? So we talk about the deaths, but there's also sexual assaults. There's also a whole bunch of other things, or just blind neglect, you know, leaving somebody in the house who you know is getting beat, you know, by their husband. Is also, you know, state action violence to some extent. So I'm not trying to end up on a negative note, but one of the things that I would push Black men to do is to make sure that you center women in the conversation around, you know, justice, because sometimes, not intentionally, but sometimes we were not intentional enough to be able to include them in that conversation. So I just want to lead this conversation by saying, let's keep the sisters and their issues also as a part of this conversation. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. And yes, Breonna Taylor is very important to remember, and we will keep her case alive. And I would like to thank everyone on the panel for joining us today. Thank you all the listeners for joining us and with your comments and questions. And as we end, I just want to remind everyone to vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.